Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply, and this is the Leather Element. If you've got a good question for us or a good idea for a Leather Element, drop it in the comment box below. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So let's compare some dyes. Let's see if we can pick a dye that's best going to fit our needs. We're going to look at 3 dyes. Our Fiebing's ProDye, Leather Dye, and Leathercolors, which is the water-based dye. Let's compare these side by side. Color, consistency, stiffness. Let's even cut one of these open and see how deep that dye actually wicks in. All right, let's step to the back of the table, get started. The 3 dyes we're going to work with, first off our ProDye, my all-time favorite, our standard leather dye, and last, our Leathercolors. This is a water-based dye. I'm anxious to see how this stacks up against the other 2. So with each of our 3 dyes, we're going to go with 4 colors. 3 standard colors, but then let's add red in there too. Let's see how that does for us. So on our swatches, I've got 3 swatches. For the P, that's our ProDye, our dye, our standard leather dye, and our Leathercolors. We're going to dip dye each of the 3. So let's start right here with our ProDye. Let's go with red. Good. Let's set that aside. In fact, I want to hit that with a rag just to get some of that excess dye off. Okay, let's set that aside. I'm going to go with black, walnut, and our light brown on our ProDyes. And last up on our ProDye, let's go with our black. And rub off some of that excess dye. All right, I'm going to do a quick cleanup. Let's jump over to our leather dye. Let's start here with our red. Let's see how this does for us. Well, that looks good. Okay, so in our regular dye, I'm going to go with our red, medium brown, light brown, and then our black. And our medium brown. Now, with cleanup, relatively easy, just a couple of paper towels. But all told, I wish I'd gone with a different bin. This was just a good fit, but it's easier to clean up when I can actually see it. We don't want to cross-contaminate our dyes. Now, it's not common that I'm dyeing multiple colors at the same time like I am now, but we can always go with a deglazer if we want to. That will really clean out our bin. Okay, so a little cleanup here. Let's jump over to our Leathercolors. When we jump over to our Leathercolors, let's go with our red, absolutely, but also a tan, a medium brown, and of course, black. So let's pour this in. And there's our red. Actually, that seems to wick in pretty quickly, and it's a good color. Now, I typically like to store my dyes in the original bottle. Tupperware is not great because air can get into that and that dye's going to thicken up. Some of that oil or that alcohol is going to evaporate out. Okay, so let's do some cleanup. Go to our next 3. And our last color in our Leathercolors, let's try our tan. And I'm anxious to see what this color looks like. I think this is going to be beautiful. Very nice. The Leathercolors seem to wick in very easily. I like that color. So I'm going to do some cleanup here. We're going to give our swatches about 2, maybe 3 hours dry time. Then let's take a look and see how these come out. We've given our swatches ample dry time, in fact, a little bit more than 3 hours. Now our ProDye and our leather dye, these dried out at about 90 minutes, give or take. I've got about 60% humidity in my shop regularly. The Leathercolors, I'm still waiting for that brown to dry. Well, all told, the other 3 colors seem to be dry. But the big point here, I'm not going to base my dye decision on dry time. What I will base my decision on is consistency, color, and stiffness. Well, consistency, actually everything looks good. Well, we dip dyed, so therefore we're stacking the cards in our favor. But color also, we've got some beautiful colors here. Now with our Pro, this is our walnut. In fact, when we add a leather balm, that's what that looks like. It's a beautiful color. Our light brown, that's a good color, but I like to add a medium brown antique and a leather balm. Makes it a really pretty color. Down here, I like the red, and I like the light brown, and over here, our tan. Actually, that's a beautiful color. And I bet once this dries out, that's going to be a pretty color too. Now, here's the biggie, stiffness. Because if we're making a belt or a cuff, I just don't want my leather to be stiff as a board, okay? ProDye. It actually feels roughly like it did before we dyed it. It's a little bit more stiff. When we jump down here to our leather dye, well, that's about stiff as a board. It doesn't even want to bend. But another problem here, notice that's our medium brown. In fact, light brown, medium brown, and black. Hard to even tell the difference between those. That's two of the things that I've never liked about the leather dye. First off, the color is always dark to me and it's very stiff. Now when we jump over to our water dyes, our Leathercolors, that black, in fact, let's see if we can get a heavy bottle. Yeah, look at that. That doesn't even want to bend under the weight of dye. That's exceptionally stiff. Our brown, can't really tell it's not dry yet. Well, that's not bad, and our red, not bad, but extremely stiff. Okay, so we've got a feel for this. Let's jump over to our punch table because we're going to take a look and see how deep our dye is wicking in. This is not necessarily something I'm going to think about when I'm choosing my dye. Most dye is going to wick fine. But what I don't want, a dye that wicks so little that if we have a blemish or a scratch on our project or panel, we see the natural leather behind that. Like I said, most dyes it's not an issue, but let's at least take a look. So right here, we've got our ProDye. Well, it's pretty good. Our top grain's a little shallow. Let's jump over to our leather dye. Actually, pretty good right there. And our Leathercolor. Well, not great there. So on our sky, or our flesh side, we've got some good penetration there, but not so much on our top grain. Actually, all told, I think our leather dye does the best there. Pro, not bad, but it's still a little bit thin there. Okay, let's jump back over to our pattern table, add a little top coat, see how these look. We're just going to go with a standard leather balm, one of my favorite top coats. This is going to darken just a little bit, but to me it's going to enrichen our dye color. But also too, we'll leave these undyed. Let's just take a look, see how much that actually darkens. So let's start right here with our ProDye red. So with this, I've got two rags, one to apply and a dry to buff. And our black, okay. Let's come back to our red. We've given this a minute or two to dry. So let's buff with our dry rag. Yeah, there we go. Now that red's looking good. I'm going to do the same thing to these three. And our black, well, that's a good looking black. Light brown, love that color. And again, the walnut. That's why I like that color so much. It's a good medium earth tone brown, no reds or yellows. And our red, that looks good. Okay, we've had a little dry time there. So really all told, we're not changing that color very much, but it certainly enriches that and makes it pop. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to our leather dye. Our black looks good right there. Outside of the stiffness, that's a good rich black. And the dark brown, really no help there. That's definitely a chocolate brown, but it feels like it doesn't want to take my top coat. Same here, I really had to rub on that. And notice here, it just doesn't want to seem to come off. The red, well, that's not actually bad, but all told, it's just not popping like our ProDyes are. One more. Let's jump over to our Leathercolors, do the same thing. Well, actually, not a bad black. That's nice and clean, but again, just stiff as a board. Well, all told, with these, I feel like I really have to struggle to get that top coat to buff out. Or with our ProDye, we simply apply and buff it right off. But there's a good comparison. The Leathercolors tan and the ProDye brown. To me, no comparison. That looks very finished, very professional. Now, all told, Any of these 3 dyes are going to do exactly what we need, but I think I'm going to stick with the ProDye as my favorite. Covers all my bases, and it's so easy to work with. Well, I hope this is a good side-by-side comparison. Help us pick just the right dye for our needs. But in all honesty, all 3 dyes are going to work well and look good. Well, I hope this is good information for you. Thanks for taking time to watch the Leather Element. Good luck with your projects.